Good morning. I have two scripture readings this morning. The first from Mary Christina Wood, the other from Joanna Macy. I call them scripture because they're inspired writings, in my opinion. From Mary Christina Wood, a lawyer who's been working for intergenerational justice. I look at the land as being part of a sacred covenant with our children and the coming generations. If we live only for ourselves, our lives are bereft of true legacy. But when we live in the presence of our ancestors, we also live for our descendants. To feel concern for the future is to bring a piece of eternity into the present and to let it guide us. The climate crisis is sorting out those who feel a duty to future generations from those who live merely for themselves. And my great mentor, Joanna Macy, who's 90 years old, and I was privileged to have a post-doom conversation with her just on Thursday. This is a dark time, filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel, or the anger, or the fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. So I'd like to speak briefly this morning and then dance with Joe here in a few minutes on this theme of a humble relationship to reality. A personal, a mythic relationship to what's fundamentally, undeniably, and inescapably real is what I'm talking about. And the reason that this is so important is because the fundamental dividing line, I believe it could be confidently and evidentially stated, that the fundamental dividing line between sustainable and unsustainable cultures, between sustainable cultures and unsustainable civilizations, is around the issue of hubris or humility. The reason that we were able to survive and thrive, we meaning human beings, for 97 to 99% of our history, is because our approach to primary reality, our stance, our basic fundamental emotional stance toward primary reality, that is our material creator, sustainer, and end. You could say the biosphere, but the biosphere is a secular term, the biosphere. It would be far more accurate to call it God or the goddess or life or Gaia or any personal name. But nevertheless, what indigenous cultures, first cultures, tribal peoples, peoples who could live in place without destroying the place, had in common, it seems, is the basic stance that we belong to the world. We belong to the land. The basic stance of unsustainable civilizations is masters of the universe. The land belongs to us. And that difference between humility and hubris, I love the ancient Greek definition of hubris. I learned this from John Michael Greer, one of our favorite authors. Hubris is the overweening pride of the doomed. The overweening pride of the doomed. And one of the reasons why the Greek plays and tragedies show these gifted characters that just shoot themselves in the foot or self-destruct is because that's a fundamental nature of the nature of human nature, which is if we don't keep humble before primary reality, that is, if we don't have a personal, respectful, honorable relationship to everything we depend upon, soil, forests, water, life, other species, and now carbon in the atmosphere and so on. If we don't have a humble relationship toward that which is undeniably real, we tend to think that we can exploit it. We tend to slip into thinking it's here for us. So we start imagining reality in our image. And the idea that humans are created in the image of God, it's actually the reverse. We have created reality in our image, and we think that ultimate reality, primary reality, the biosphere, is all for us. We think we're the be-all and end-all of history. And evolution, we're the pinnacle, the crown. They're like, whoa, evolution was all about us. Let me just quickly paint out a 100-year timeline. I may have shared this when I've shared here before, but I don't remember, so I'm going to do it now. Just real quick, if you imagine the history of everyone and everything, the whole history of the universe, 100 years, just to make 14 billion years, make it easier to get our heads around. 100 years. At day 2, all the hydrogen was created. Early galaxies were formed in the first 20 or 30 years. Our solar system forms at 67. Earth cools below the boiling point of water at 69, and it rains for eons, and all the oceans form. The only new water that's been added are some icy comets. Okay? Life comes alive. Earth comes alive. Bacteria come alive and then start feeding on the photons of the sun at 72, and then you've got this long complexification of life and the diversification and the adaptation. That's what evolution is. It's not getting better. It's getting more diverse, more adapted, dealing with the conditions. Do you know when dinosaurs were around on a 100-year timeline? May of 98 to July of 99. Right? Do you know when human beings show up? When reality created us? Yes, exactly. Christmas Day. So, that was good. Maybe I said that before. I don't know. But yes. December 25th of the 99th year. We domesticated fire on December 29th of the 99th year, and we've only been speaking in words, symbolic language, on the last day. Now, I don't know about you, but if the entire universe is 100 years long, and our species, Homo sapiens, shows up on the very last day of a 100-year process, to me it's sort of a collective insanity to think about the whole thing was meant for us. And so it turns out that humility, and what I mean by a mythic relationship to reality, a mythic relationship that engenders humility, is having a personal. It's basically realizing that all the world's myths and religions, you can't understand them if you don't understand our brain's propensity to give human characteristics to what's more than human. It's called personification. James Hillman, one of the most famous psychologists of the last 70 years, said you can't possibly understand the world's myths and religions if you don't understand our brain's propensity to give human characteristics to what's more than human. Gaia is not the spirit of the earth. Gaia is not the goddess of the earth. Gaia is a personification of the earth, which is inescapably real. It would be kind of like walking into a room and hearing two people debating whether Uncle Sam was real. Well, of course Uncle Sam is real. No, he's not. What are you kidding me? What would you think? You think they don't get it. Uncle Sam is a personification of the U.S. government, which is inescapably real. I consider the theist-atheist debate to be one of the great examples of collective insanity of our time. Because you've got all these theists that basically believe, it's all about beliefs, in an otherworldly entity outside the universe who blesses some and smites others. And if you believe in this external entity, this supernatural creator, then you're a theist. And if you say, there ain't no such thing, then you're an atheist. And yet both sides tend to treat the biosphere as an it that we think we can exploit, rather than a thou to be honored and respected. This is why the indigenous peoples, the first peoples, are those, they're once again, perhaps for the first time for many, being recognized as elders, because for many of them, most of them, they have not lost that personal relationship to time, that personal relationship to nature. Indigenous cultures didn't believe in spirits. They related personally to all the different aspects of reality. There's a profound difference. thinking that that river has a spirit, and I believe in the spirit. See, that was Western anthropology did that. The indigenous people simply had a personal relationship to the river. And so we can also play with personification, and in so doing, develop a more intimate relationship to the past. For example, that's the thing. For indigenous peoples, for peoples who live sustainably, okay, people who can live in place without destroying the place, they nurtured a humble relationship to time. They honored the ancestors. In fact, when you died, you didn't just end, you became an ancestor. And you were consulted as an important aspect of how to survive and thrive in the moment, because you consulted the wisdom, imaginatively, of course. This is in your imagination or ritual. But you consult the wisdom of the past. And then you live in the present in ways that have the seventh generation in mind. So that's an honorable relationship. You're imagining what the ancestors would say. You're imagining what the descendants will say about how we live today. And you're living in accord, in humility, in integrity with that. And I suggest to you that that's the thing that's lacking most in Western, not just Western, global industrial civilization. Because global industrial civilization, the basic stance is man, conqueror of nature. And time, I suggest, will prove that to be the single most self-destructive thought form in human history. So I'm going to invite my brother Joe to speak anything he wants in terms of this humility, this nurturing a humble relationship to time and nature. And then I'll conclude, and then we'll go into a lot more depth, just sort of dancing with each other this evening. We're not even going to use any slides this evening, just because I so love this brother, and our thinking is aligned and yet also divergent. And so I'm just excited to see what gets created today.
Ditto on that. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe. What I was really feeling, as I heard Michael speaking just now, was a specific thing to personify in this creating a mythic relationship, which comes in two parts. One part is, how do I personify and experience an intimate relationship with the death of the biosphere? With something that is happening in real time right now, that we don't know how far it goes, but it's on a path where its next few stages are going to involve further loss of complexity and diversity of life. The extinctions that are happening are not going to just stop tomorrow. We're going to have more and more of them for a period of time. In the extreme scenarios, things like multicellular organisms go away, and probably bacteria sticks around, and that's a severe mass extinction event. Probably it won't go that bad, but we can't say for sure. So how do we personify? How do I have a relationship to a story like that that has been accumulating in our collective knowledge of what's happening to the planet right now? And then the other way that I feel we need to personify the ultimate reality is from this inquiry into the bearing witness, hospicing of, and killing of the biosphere, of which I am complicit. I have helped to kill my mother, and I'm watching her die, and I'm seeing something. What do I see? I don't know until I'm there. So how do I relate to myself in the moments forward in this story when I don't know where I am in that story? A lot of people have tried to create the new story, the great transition, the story that replaces the last story. So I studied cognitive linguistics with George Lakoff, the person who's made strategic framing popular in the public consciousness of political activists. And one of the things I learned from studying cognitive linguistics is that stories are built on metaphors. Metaphors are neural substrates of synaptic connections in our brains that make sense of what our bodies perceive as they enact the world, just as you enact a play. So if I enact Macbeth, I take on the role, I embody it, it is performed with neural synaptic processes. Patterns in my brain, in my body, in the hormones in my blood, as I experience and enact emotion and movement. How can I tell the story that has not yet been enacted? The cognitive scientist in me says, you can't. It's in your body. In the moment you enact it. And here's the thing. What's happening right now? Unprecedented. Never happened before. You know, there's only one time in the history of the earth that a species was able to cause a mass extinction event, and they were bacteria. They were single-celled organisms excreting and pooping out oxygen until they drowned in it, making the pathway possible for multicellular life. Here we are, mammals with a neocortex, capacity for empathy and comprehension. And what some anthropologists have to describe with this beautiful phrase, terror management theory. Who's heard of terror management theory? A couple people? Terror management theory is an explanation for a very strange biological experience, which is when a biological organism gains the ability to imagine its own death and have feelings about it. As far as we know, humans are the only organism in the history of biology on Earth that we can say for certain has this terror of our own death. So we create a whole bunch of psychological coping mechanisms to deal with it, which means, what's that? There's some open questioning about their capacity for semantic comprehension. So there's some live debate about elements of this for sure. But here's the thing. We as human beings are able to document, record, make sense of, and understand the mass extinction that we're causing. I'm pretty sure whales can't do that, but maybe eventually they'll evolve to a place they can if we don't get rid of them. And so here's the thing. How do we make sense of an unfolding, emerging process that we have not gotten far enough in to make sense of? And I think that is something that we should give ourselves the time to become humble about our own ignorance and forgive ourselves for not knowing what that story will be, because that opens us up to living it. And I'll pass it back.
So in the last 5 minutes or so of this sermon time, I want to build on the language component, because language structures reality, and the language that we use can either nurture humility or nurture hubris. The language itself can and does do that. For example, if we refer to primary reality, okay? Primary reality is nothing you can believe in. Just consider it the universe plus. The universe plus if there's anything outside the universe, or nature plus, like the voice and the presence of nature, whatever, the biosphere. But if we refer to, let's just call the biosphere. If we refer to the biosphere as Gaia, then there's at least the possibility that we'll realize that all benefits and all real wealth come from Gaia. In fact, let me just not even taint it with that. Let's just try life. Life as a person. I'm personifying life. So if we relate to life as divine, as sacred, as more important than us, as what we need to cherish, because if we don't cherish life and everything that makes life possible, then our grandchildren may not even exist. Knows the suffering that's caused by living only in the present without attending to the well-being of everything we depend upon. So if we call life Gaia, if we call life the environment, those are two different things. One evokes humility before Gaia. One evokes at least a certain sense of arrogance, or at least taking it for granted, which is the environment. See, the environment, this is a quote from Thomas Berry, my great mentor. Thomas Berry, who was one of the leading ecological and evolutionary thinkers of the 20th century, said, the environment is not our surroundings, it's our source, sustenance, and end. It would be just as accurate to call the environment God. But if we don't refer to it with a single syllable divine word, Gaia or God, and we just say the environment, we get the delusion that we can just do whatever we want because, hey, evolution's all about us anyway, right? And what we do is we condemn future generations. We act in an anti-future way without even realizing it because our language is leading us in that. And so that's why I invite us to nurture language that's more personal, that's more mythic. In other words, again, mythic not meaning about anything otherworldly, mythic as playing with personification. I'll give you just a quick example. For Connie and I, we sing to what you call the sun, we call great soul, S-O-L. We do that just because there's some history to that soul. So, hi, hi, great soul, we relate personally. It's playfully, it's goofy, right? It's not literal. But by singing to the sun at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, it actually nurtures a more humble relationship to this reality that we call the sun. Because if there's anything in this solar system that's God, that's divine, it's that being. Right? Nora is our personification of North America. So what you call North America, we call Nora. And for 18 years, we've traveled Nora and fallen ever more in love with this amazing continent. Angel is our van. And the voice of Angel is the GPS, right? Our relationship is Jasmine. There's Connie, there's Michael, and then there's Jasmine. And Jasmine is the mythic personification that gives us a more humble and personal relationship to us, or to we. Because sometimes it's really clear what Michael wants to do, and sometimes it's really clear what Connie wants to do. But if one of us asks, what does Jasmine want? It allows me as a man to not be attached to my perspective. And I can go with something she might have suggested in the first place, but I don't feel like she's won and I've lost. I feel proud that I'm doing what's good for Jasmine. Now, why it is that Jasmine usually wants to do what she wanted to do in the first place, I haven't quite figured that one out. But, you know, a happy life is a happy wife is a happy life, as they say. So my point is that we can nurture simply by playing with personification. If you have a marriage and you haven't named it, I invite you to do it. And for 1 week, just play with it. See what it's like for you. And drop it if it's not useful. Right? Nora is our personification, as I said, of North America. And Nora, we need to nurture a humble relationship with Gaia, too. And so this evening, I don't honestly know what Joe and I are going to say, because I'm not using slides. We're going to generate it in the moment, related to what we've been beginning to touch on this morning, and then just seeing where the creativity dances. But what I do know is this: post-doom is a really good way of phrasing what I think we're about. Because one of the other things, in fact, I'll conclude on this in terms of language, that what we call regeneration, the title of our program tonight has regeneration. Regenerative wisdom for challenging times. Regeneration is all about death being that which is essential for life. Breakdown, compost is essential for new beginnings, new life. In the Christian tradition, it's mythically spoken of as resurrection. Death, resurrection. That's not about some God-man 2,000 years ago. It's about the nature of everything in the living world. And so how do we participate in the regenerative capacities of life, even if we go extinct in the next 100 years? And if you don't know that there's at least a possibility that we could go extinct in the next 100 years, you're not paying attention. We could possibly last another 2 or 3 million years before an asteroid or supervolcano or something takes us out, but we're most likely going to last sometime between 50 years from now and 5 million years from now. It's probably not going to be further out than 5 million, and it most likely, hopefully, won't be less than the next 50. But somewhere in that time frame. And then guess what? Species will come and go. The Earth will turn. The Milky Way. Life will continue to do. Gaia will continue to do all the things that life and species and Gaia does. And so to practice regeneration means to do everything we can to help our species downshift and become more ecological, to soften the crash that's coming, the consequences, but then also to plant seeds. Like Connie, my wife, is one of the leading point people in North America in terms of assisting trees, native trees, in migrating north. Because even if our species goes extinct this century, those of us who love a particular species of tree or plant and can take seeds from further south, where they're more warm adapted, and then plant those seeds further north, where they're going to need to be in the real near future. Plants have been doing that for millions of years. As the glaciers come, all the plants go south. As the glaciers go back. See, this is not invasive if you're moving plants just north and south. It becomes invasive when you start moving things across continents and watersheds. So that's something that we can do to participate in the regenerative wisdom, the regenerative divinity, if you want to use that word, of life, whether our species lasts another 50 years or 5 million years. And that's holy work. I consider planting trees, building topsoil, learning to compost, building greater sense of community. Because in difficult times, things are going to be difficult. Things are already difficult for many people. As they say, the future is already in the present. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And so nurturing community as well as we nurture humility, and then build soil, plant trees, do anything you can do, but do it from a larger than human perspective. Do something on behalf of life. Last summer, I tended to 400 baby trees. I nurtured 400 baby trees. 1 day a week, that was my job. And that was holy work. When you're afraid the world's going to hell in a handbasket, do something on behalf of life. It'll nurture your soul. And it will then allow you to do all the other things that are healthy in your relationship to each other and your relationship to your community. Amen.